Mom wed her latest husband and erased me from their new family. On my 18th birthday, I cut myself from her life, and what followed next was pure chaos. What if the person who was supposed to protect you most was also the one systematically erasing you, piece by painful piece, from your own life? That's what happened to me, and it all started with a casual, devastating dismissal that echoed like a gunshot in my quiet kitchen. The humid air in our suburban home always felt heavy with unspoken tensions, but that Tuesday evening, it was suddenly charged with a different kind of dread. The fluorescent kitchen light hummed, casting a sickly glow on my mother's face as she finally looked up from her phone, delivering the blow that would unravel my entire world. "Chloe, you're not coming to Hawaii." Just like that. So casually, so dismissively, that for a split second, I actually thought I'd misheard her. But then, the words landed. A physical punch straight to the gut, shattering everything I thought I knew about my family and setting me on a path to uncover a betrayal so profound it would redefine my entire life. I was 17, just 3 months shy of my 18th birthday, and I'd been practically counting the seconds until that family vacation. Months of dreaming about sandy beaches and crystal clear water, our first real big trip since Mom married Mark 2 years prior. I stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, my backpack still slung over one shoulder, probably looking like a deer caught in headlights. She didn't even bother to look up from her phone, just scrolled through what I now realize must have been resort photos, perfectly oblivious to the earthquake she'd just unleashed. "What do you mean I'm not coming?" My voice cracked, betraying the hurricane raging inside me. I felt like a child again, small and insignificant. "Mark thinks it would be better if it's just the 4 of us this time, so the kids can bond with him without any complications." The kids. She meant Mark's twins, Sophia and Ethan, both 14. And there they were, lounging on the living room couch, their faces mirroring each other in an expression of barely concealed triumph. My throat tightened. "Complications," I repeated, the word flat, devoid of any warmth. "I'm a complication." Finally, Mom's gaze flickered up from her screen, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something in her eyes. Was it guilt? Or just pure irritation that I wasn't making this easy, that I wasn't just quietly accepting my dismissal? "Chloe, don't be dramatic. You can stay with Aunt Carol for the week. She's excited to have you." Aunt Carol, the woman who lived in a cramped studio apartment above a laundromat with 3 cats that guaranteed my eyes would swell shut within minutes. Mom knew this. She'd taken me to the allergist herself when I was 12. "I'm allergic to her cats," I stated, desperate for her to acknowledge this simple, inconvenient fact. "Then take some Benadryl." And just like that, her attention was back on her phone. "This discussion is over." That was it. Dismissed. Erased. I walked upstairs, each step heavier than the last, heading to my bedroom. It used to be my grandmother's warm, inviting sewing room before Mom decided to gut the entire house and let Mark's interior designer transform it into something cold and sterile, like a page ripped from a magazine. My space had been shrinking for a long time. First, literally, when they converted half of it into a walk-in closet for Sophia. Then, figuratively, as my photos disappeared from the walls, my grandmother's beloved quilt got donated to charity, and my name mysteriously vanished from the chore chart because, according to Mark, it cluttered the aesthetic. I sat on my bed, staring at the empty wall where my father, David's photo, used to hang. Dad died when I was 8. A construction accident that left Mom with a sizable settlement, a paid-off house, and it felt like a daughter she resented more with each passing year. Mark appeared 5 years later, a regional manager with a pharmaceutical company, 2 kids from his first marriage, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. The wedding invitation, I remember, listed the bride and groom and their children, Sophia Carter, Ethan Carter. No mention of Chloe, the daughter who'd been there first. It was a subtle erasure, but it felt like a punch. I opened my laptop. I wasn't researching vacation destinations or allergy remedies. No, I was researching something else entirely. Something cold. Something precise. By the way, if you're still with me, still captivated by this unbelievable journey, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, the story only gets more intense from here, and you won't want to miss a single twist. 3 months later, I turned 18. It was a Tuesday. Mom forgot. Mark didn't acknowledge it. Sophia and Ethan were at a sleepover. I came downstairs to an empty kitchen. No cake, no cards, nothing but a sticky note on the refrigerator, a casual reminder to pick up Mark's dry cleaning. I picked up the dry cleaning. I even smiled at the woman behind the counter, carrying Mark's perfectly pressed shirts to my car as if nothing was wrong, as if my heart wasn't a hollow echo in my chest. Then I drove to a small law office on the other side of town, and I picked up a certified letter from Arthur Reynolds, the attorney I'd been corresponding with for nearly a year. A year. Since that night, I wasn't going to Hawaii. The letter confirmed what I'd spent nearly a year preparing for. My grandmother, my father's mother, had left me a trust. Not a small one, the kind of trust that required its own accountant and came with a modest house on the other side of town. Mom had known about it. She'd been the trustee. She'd also been siphoning money from it for years, believing I'd never find out until I was 25, when the trust was supposed to fully vest. What she didn't know was that I had quietly petitioned the court for early release. I had meticulously documented every instance of financial abuse, every receipt that didn't match, every single withdrawal that went to fund vacations I wasn't invited on, and home renovations that systematically erased my existence. The judge had ruled in my favor the previous month after nearly 8 grueling months of legal proceedings. The trust was mine. So was the house. And so were the cold, hard records showing my mother had stolen nearly $200,000 from me over the past decade. The sheer audacity of it, the betrayal, left me numb. Finding Arthur hadn't been easy. I'd gone through 4 consultations with attorneys who looked at me like I was a confused teenager making up stories. One of them actually called my mother to verify my claims before I'd even finished explaining the situation. She told him I was going through a difficult phase and thanked him for letting her know. He'd shown me out of his office with a patronizing smile and a recommendation for a family therapist. The arrogance, the dismissal, burned. But Arthur was different. He was 63 years old, semi-retired, and had spent 30 years prosecuting financial crimes before switching to private practice. When I walked into his office with my folder of bank statements and handwritten notes, he didn't look at me like I was wasting his time. He looked at me like I was bringing him exactly the kind of puzzle he'd spent his entire career solving. We met every Saturday for 3 months during my junior year. I'd take the bus across town, telling Mom I was studying at the library. Arthur taught me how to read financial documents, how to identify patterns and transactions, how to build a timeline that would hold up in court. He never charged me a penny for those sessions. When I asked him why, he said his own daughter had been in a similar situation once and someone had helped her when no one else would. Pay it forward someday, Chloe. That's all I ask. The hardest part wasn't gathering the evidence. It was keeping my composure at home while I did it. Every dinner where Mom praised Sophia's accomplishments while ignoring mine. Every weekend where Mark planned family activities that somehow never included me. Every morning where I woke up in a house full of people and felt completely, utterly alone. I learned to smile through it, to nod and agree, to pretend that my heart wasn't breaking a little more each day. To watch my mother become a stranger wearing a familiar face. I didn't tell her any of this. I just waited. Waited until she and Mark left for dinner. Then I packed my things. Not all of them, just what mattered, and I walked out the front door. The moving company I'd hired was efficient. By 9 o'clock that night, my grandmother's house was mine, in a way that Mom's house had never been. I slept in my grandmother's old bedroom, in a bed I bought with my own money, under a quilt I'd found at an estate sale that looked almost exactly like the one Mom had given away. My phone rang at 6 o'clock the next morning. "Where are you?" Mom's voice was sharp, accusatory, edged with a frantic energy I'd never heard before. "Your room is empty." "What did you do?" "I moved out." The words felt powerful, liberating. Silence. "Then, you can't just move out." "I'm 18, I said quietly, firmly. "That's exactly why I can." "Chloe, this is ridiculous. Come home right now. We need to discuss this like adults." "I am an adult," I said, a wave of calm washing over me. That's the whole point. I hung up. Then I blocked her number. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Arthur Reynolds helped me file a civil suit against my mother for misappropriation of trust funds. We had bank records, forged signatures, and a paper trail that stretched back to when I was 11 years old. The forensic accountant found discrepancies I hadn't even noticed. Withdrawals that coincided perfectly with Mark's business trips and Sophia's private school tuition. Mom found out about the lawsuit on a Thursday when she was served papers at her office. She showed up at my grandmother's house that night, pounding on the door so hard the neighbors came outside to stare. "You ungrateful little monster," she shrieked, mascara streaming down her face. "After everything I've done for you. I clothed you. I fed you. I gave you a roof over your head." I opened the door, but I didn't invite her in. The anger was still a cold ember, but my voice was steady. "You stole almost $200,000 from me," I said calmly, looking her dead in the eye. "You forged my signature. You lied to the bank. You used my inheritance to fund your new life with a man who pretended I didn't exist. That money was for your future." "I was protecting it," she insisted, her voice shrill. "You spent $40,000 on a kitchen renovation. You spent $23,000 on Sophia's Sweet 16. You spent $18,000 on a trip to Bali that I wasn't invited on." Mom's face went white. "How do you know?" "Bank records, Mom," I replied, a chilling clarity in my voice. "They keep bank records." Mark's car pulled up behind her. He got out slowly, his expression calculating, that fake smile already forming. "Chloe," he said smoothly, trying to sound reasonable. "Let's all calm down and talk about this. I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I countered, not breaking eye contact. "You helped her steal from me. Your name is on the Bali reservation." Mark's smile faltered, a flicker of genuine shock crossing his face. "Now wait just a minute. I'm not discussing this with you, either of you. My attorney will be in touch." I closed the door and locked it. Through the window, I watched Mom collapse against Mark, sobbing. He patted her back mechanically, already pulling out his phone. The next morning, I woke to find my car had been keyed. Long, deep scratches running from the hood to the trunk, spelling out a word I won't repeat here. I had a strong suspicion who had done it. A neighbor's security camera later confirmed what I already knew, capturing Ethan sneaking across my lawn at 3 o'clock in the morning with something metallic glinting in his hand. I didn't call the police. Instead, I took photos, documented everything, and added it to the growing file Arthur was building. Every act of harassment, every threatening voicemail, every time Mark drove past my grandmother's house at 2 a.m., it would all become evidence of a pattern. They hired a lawyer. They even tried to countersue for defamation. The judge threw it out in the preliminary hearing, warning them against further frivolous claims. The civil case proceeded. During the discovery phase, something surfaced that even Arthur hadn't anticipated. Mark's first wife hadn't died of natural causes like everyone believed. She'd been diagnosed with a terminal illness, yes, but the life insurance policy Mark collected had been taken out just 6 months before her death. The insurance company had investigated at the time and found nothing actionable, but the timing raised questions that suddenly seemed relevant to our case. Arthur advised me not to pursue that angle. We had enough evidence for the financial claims, and accusing Mark of something more sinister could derail the entire case. But I filed the information away in my mind, sensing it might matter later. The weeks leading up to the trial were exhausting in ways I hadn't expected. I was working part-time at a bookstore to pay for groceries and utilities, finishing my senior year online through a virtual program to avoid the daily, painful reminders of my old life, and meeting with Arthur at least twice a week to prepare my testimony. Some nights I would lie awake in my grandmother's old bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I was doing the right thing. Mom was still my mother, after all. There had been good years before Mark, before everything fell apart. Birthday parties where she actually smiled. Sick days where she brought me soup and read to me. A time when I believed she loved me. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. A different mother, a different daughter, a different life that had been slowly poisoned until nothing healthy could grow. 2 months before the trial, something truly unexpected happened. Sophia showed up at my door. I almost didn't recognize her. The smug, privileged teenager who'd watched me get erased from my own family was gone. In her place stood a girl with dark circles under her eyes and a tremor in her hands. "Can I come in?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Against my better judgment, against every instinct screaming at me, I let her. She sat on my grandmother's old couch and stared at her hands for a long moment before speaking. "I know you hate me. You should. I was horrible to you." She looked up and there were tears in her eyes, "But I need to tell you something about my dad." I sat down across from her, my heart hammering. "What about him?" "He's been doing the same thing to me and Ethan. To our college funds. Our mom set them up before she died, and Dad was supposed to manage them, but she swallowed hard. Ethan found the statements last week. They're almost empty. He took everything." I stared at her. "You're serious?" "He paid for the house renovations, the trips, my sweet 16, all of it. Not with your mom's money, with ours too." The pieces started clicking into place with horrifying precision. Mark hadn't just helped my mother steal from me. He'd been running the exact same scheme on his own children, using their dead mother's legacy to fund his lavish lifestyle. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice still tight. Sophia wiped her eyes. "Because my lawyer says we need documentation, proof of a pattern, and you have all the records of what he did to you." "Your lawyer?" She nodded. "Ethan, and I hired one last week. We're filing our own suit." I sat back, processing. A month ago, I would have laughed in her face. She'd made my life miserable for 2 years, standing by while her father systematically erased me from every family photo, every holiday, every moment that should have included me. But she was also a kid who'd lost her mother and trusted her father to protect her, just like I had trusted mine. "I'll share the records," I said finally, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "But I have conditions." "Anything. You testify in my case about what you saw, about how Mark and my mother treated me." Sophia nodded slowly, a renewed determination in her eyes. "I will. I promise." Over the following weeks, Sophia and I developed an uneasy alliance. We weren't friends, and I don't think either of us pretended we could be. Too much had happened. Too many cruel words and deliberate exclusions and moments where she could have chosen kindness and didn't. But we shared something now. A betrayal so profound it transcended our history. She told me things I had known. How Mark had coached her and Ethan on what to say about me, framing every interaction to make me look difficult and ungrateful. How he'd convinced them that their inheritance was safe while systematically draining it to fund his lifestyle. How he'd done the same thing to their mother before she died, isolating her from friends and family until she had no one left but him. "I think he married your mom because she was already good at it," Sophia said one afternoon as we sat in my grandmother's kitchen, documents spread across the table. "At isolating people. I mean, she'd already cut you off from your dad's family. All he had to do was help her finish the job." I thought about that long after she left, about how abuse can be collaborative. Two people enabling each other's worst impulses until cruelty becomes routine. My mother hadn't needed Mark to teach her how to erase me. She just needed someone to tell her it was okay. Sophia kept her promise. The trial lasted 4 days. Mom's attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive child seeking to destroy her family, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, forged documents, a handwriting expert who confirmed that the signatures weren't mine. And Sophia, sitting in the witness box, describing in calm detail how Mark had orchestrated the slow erasure of my existence from the household. He said Chloe was a reminder of things that needed to be left in the past, Sophia testified. He said the family would be stronger without her. He convinced her mother that cutting ties was the healthy choice. Mom sat in the gallery, watching her stepdaughter dismantle the narrative she'd been telling herself for years. Mark wasn't there. He'd stopped coming after the second day when the forensic accountant testified about the pattern of withdrawals. The judge ruled in my favor. Full restitution of the stolen funds plus interest, plus damages. $247,000 to be paid within 90 days. Mom didn't have it. Mark didn't have it either. Not after Sophia and Ethan's lawsuit revealed the full extent of his financial manipulation. They'd won their case too. And Mark was now facing criminal charges for fraud. The day after the verdict, I received an anonymous package at my grandmother's house. Inside was a thumb drive and a handwritten note that simply said, "Only from someone who wants the whole truth told." I almost didn't plug it in. Arthur had warned me about potential retaliation, about the lengths desperate people might go when their lives were falling apart. But something about the careful, almost clinical phrasing of the note made me intensely curious. The thumb drive contained hundreds of files, emails mostly, dating back years. Many were between Mark and people I didn't recognize, discussing investments and properties and accounts in places like the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. But buried among the financial correspondences was something else entirely. A series of emails between my mother and a man named Kevin Miller. The messages started innocently enough. Workplace conversations about schedules and meetings, but they quickly became something else. Intimate. Planning. Dangerous. I read for 3 hours without stopping. By the end, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely scroll. Arthur arrived within the hour. He spent the rest of the night reviewing everything while I sat in my grandmother's living room, trying to process the horrifying reality of what I'd discovered. We turned everything over to the district attorney the following week. I never learned definitively who sent the thumb drive, though I had my suspicions. Perhaps it was a former colleague of Mark's seeking revenge. Perhaps it was someone from my mother's past whose conscience had finally caught up with them. Perhaps Mark himself had arranged for it to surface, setting the stage for his eventual cooperation with prosecutors. The source mattered less than what it revealed. Mom's house went into foreclosure. Mark filed for divorce. Mom moved into a small rental apartment on the outskirts of town, unable to stay with Aunt Carol due to my severe cat allergies being genetic. As it turned out, Aunt Carol herself had recently developed the same condition. I thought that would be the end of it. Justice served. Wounds beginning to heal. I was wrong. The anonymous sender of the thumb drive remained a mystery. Arthur traced the package to a shipping center across the state, but couldn't identify who had dropped it off. Whoever they were, they had given prosecutors exactly what they needed to pursue a much larger investigation. 6 months after the trial, I received another letter, not from a lawyer this time, but from a woman named Laura Hayes. She said she was my father's sister. My mind reeled. I didn't have a father's sister. Dad was an only child. Mom had told me that for as long as I could remember. I met Laura at a coffee shop downtown, half expecting it to be some kind of scam. But the moment she walked in, I knew she was telling the truth. She had my father's eyes. My eyes. "Your mother told you David was an only child because she didn't want you to know about me," Laura explained, sliding a worn photo album across the table. "We had a falling out before you were born. Your father tried to reconcile, but your mother wouldn't allow it. After he died, she made sure I couldn't find you." I noticed Laura wore a simple gold wedding band. Hayes must have been her. Married name, I realized, not her birth name. She'd been Laura Harrison once, just like my father. The photo album was full of pictures I'd never seen. My father as a teenager. My father at his college graduation. My father holding a baby that looked exactly like my baby photos. "That's you," Laura said softly. "He sent me that picture a week before the accident. He was so proud of you." I started crying in the middle of the coffee shop, and I didn't care who saw. Laura told me everything. About how Mom had isolated Dad from his family, one relationship at a time. About how she'd threatened Laura with a restraining order if she tried to contact me. About the letters Laura had sent every year on my birthday. Letters Mom had intercepted and destroyed. "I never stopped looking for you," Laura said, reaching across the table to hold my hand. A gesture of comfort I hadn't felt in years. "And when I saw the news coverage of your lawsuit, I finally had a way to find you." We talked for hours that first day. She showed me photos from her own wedding where my father had been best man. She described holidays they'd spent together as children, traditions her parents had started that she still observed. She gave me a small box that had belonged to my grandmother, my real grandmother on my father's side, containing a locket with photos of my father as a baby. I had family, real family, who wanted me, who had always wanted me, who had been kept away by the same woman who had been stealing from me my entire life. The anger I felt then was different from anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't the hot, immediate rage of discovering the financial theft or the cold fury of realizing I had been systematically erased. This was something deeper, a profound grief that felt like losing my father all over again. He had had a sister who loved him. I'd had an aunt who loved me, and my mother had stolen that from both of us out of nothing but spite and control. I gained an aunt that day, an aunt who never stopped caring about me, even when my own mother had tried to erase me from existence. But the story wasn't over yet. 3 months later, Mark contacted me. He was facing trial for the fraud charges and wanted to make a deal. He would provide testimony and additional documentation against my mother in exchange for leniency. He knew things, he said. Things about the accident that killed my father that went beyond what the anonymous thumb drive had revealed. I met with him in a conference room at the county jail, Arthur Reynolds by my side. Mark looked older, diminished. The smooth charm was gone, replaced by the desperate calculation of a man watching his life fall apart. Your mother was having an affair, he said bluntly, before your father died, with a man named Kevin Miller. He worked at the same construction company as David. I felt my stomach drop. The emails on the thumb drive had hinted at this, but hearing it stated so plainly, in such stark terms, made it terrifyingly real. What else do you know beyond what was in those emails? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark leaned forward. Kevin Miller was the safety inspector who signed off on the equipment that failed, the equipment that killed your father. But what those emails don't show is what I found later. Receipts. Cash withdrawals from your mother's account in the weeks before the accident. Payments to Kevin that stopped the day your father died. The room went silent. Arthur put his hand on my arm, but I barely felt it. The accident wasn't an accident, Mark continued, the words echoing in the small room. Kevin deliberately ignored warning signs on equipment he knew your father would be using. He filed false reports. Looked the other way when maintenance was needed. Your mother needed David gone so she could be with Kevin and collect the settlement. But Kevin panicked after it happened. The guilt got to him. He took a job overseas, cut off contact. Your mother was left with the settlement money and a daughter who looked too much like the man she'd had killed. Everything I thought I knew about my childhood rearranged itself in that moment. The way Mom flinched whenever I laughed because my laugh sounded like Dad's. The photos she'd removed from the walls, claiming they made her sad. The inheritance she'd stolen, as if taking what should have been mine could somehow erase the reminder of what she'd done. She hadn't just neglected me. She hadn't just stolen from me. She'd killed my father. And then she'd spent years punishing me for having the audacity to look like him. You have proof of this beyond the emails? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Mark smiled, and for the first time it looked genuine, albeit chilling. I had the financial records, bank statements showing the payments. Your mother was never very careful about keeping things separate. I made copies of everything before she kicked me out. Things that weren't on that thumb drive, whoever sent it. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, a fresh wave of nausea washing over me. What do you get out of it? Mark leaned back in his chair, the orange jumpsuit making his pale skin look almost gray. I'm a bad person, Chloe. I know that. I stole from you. I stole from my own kids. I helped your mother pretend you didn't exist, but I didn't kill anyone. He paused, something flickering across his face that might have been genuine emotion. When I found those financial records, I realized what she was capable of. The emails were one thing, but seeing the money trail made it real. I started making copies of everything, insurance in case she ever decided I'd become inconvenient. 2. So this is about self-preservation mostly. He met my eyes. But I also watched you for 2 years. Watched how she treated you, how she looked at you sometimes when she thought no one was paying attention, like you were a ghost she couldn't get rid of. He shook his head slowly. My kids were cruel to you because I encouraged them to be. Your mother was cruel to you because she couldn't stand the sight of your face. Those aren't the same thing. I didn't know what to say to that. He was right in a horrible, gut-wrenching way. His cruelty had been calculated and purposeful, designed to serve his own interests. My mother's cruelty had been something else entirely, something that came from a place so dark I wasn't sure I wanted to understand it. The financial records Mark provided were authenticated. Combined with the emails from the anonymous thumb drive, prosecutors had enough to build a case. Kevin Miller was tracked down in Singapore. The extradition process took 14 months, but eventually he was returned to face charges. My mother was arrested on conspiracy charges while the case against Kevin was still being built. The trial made national news. I testified about the years of emotional neglect, the financial abuse, the systematic erasure of my identity. Kevin Miller broke down on the stand and confessed everything, painting a picture of a woman so desperate to escape her marriage that she'd pay him to neglect his duties as safety inspector, knowing that the faulty equipment would eventually fail. He hadn't known exactly when or how the accident would happen, he claimed, only that he'd been paid to ensure it would. The jury didn't buy his attempt to minimize his role. Mom maintained her innocence until the very end. Even as the jury returned a guilty verdict, she looked at me with something that might have been hatred, or might have been regret. I couldn't tell anymore. She was sentenced to 25 years. The courtroom erupted when the verdict was read. Reporters rushed for the doors, already filing their stories. Mom's attorney slumped in his chair, defeated despite months of creative legal maneuvering. Aunt Carol wailed from the gallery, her voice cutting through the chaos like a siren. But I didn't hear any of it. I was looking at my mother, watching her face as the reality of what was happening finally broke through whatever wall she'd built inside herself. For just a moment, I saw her as she might have been, a woman who made terrible choices and spent years running from the consequences. A woman who could have been different if she'd wanted to be. She looked at me, and our eyes met for the last time. I expected to feel satisfaction or relief or even pity. Instead, I felt nothing at all. She was a stranger wearing my mother's face, and she had been for longer than I wanted to admit. The bailiffs led her away. She didn't look back. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding sunlight, Laura on one side of me and Arthur on the other. Reporters shouted questions that I didn't answer. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the crowd, I saw Sophia and Ethan standing together, watching. Sophia caught my eye and nodded once. We weren't friends. Not exactly. But we understood each other in a way that nobody else could. Mark got 5 years for his fraud charges and 3 more for his role in covering up what he'd known about the accident. It wasn't justice for everything he'd done, but it was something. After the trial ended, Sophia and Ethan invited me to dinner. We went to a small Italian restaurant that none of us had any memories attached to, a neutral space where we could try to figure out who we were to each other now that the people who connected us were behind bars. I keep thinking about what my therapist said, Sophia told me over pasta, picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth. About how kids model what they see. My dad taught me to be cruel to you because being cruel was useful to him. Your mom taught you to be invisible because your existence was painful to her. She twirled her fork absently. Neither of us had a chance, really. Ethan nodded but didn't speak. He'd become quieter since everything happened, more thoughtful. The arrogant teenager who'd keyed my car was gone, replaced by someone still figuring out who he wanted to be. We're not them, I said finally, the words ringing with a quiet conviction. We don't have to become what they made us. Sophia looked at me for a long moment. Then she raised her glass of sparkling water, and Ethan did the same. To not becoming them, she said. I raised my glass and clinked it against theirs. The sound was small in the noisy restaurant, but it felt like something beginning. Mom's house sold at auction. The money went to pay her legal debts. I didn't want any of it. What I wanted was a life that had been stolen from me. A father who should have seen me grow up. A childhood that should have been filled with love instead of a constant, sharp pain. A mother who should have protected me instead of treating me like an inconvenience to be managed. I couldn't get any of that back, but I could build something new. Laura helped me go through my grandmother's things, the boxes that had been in storage since she died. We found letters my father had written to his mother, talking about me, talking about his hopes for my future. We found a journal where he documented his concerns about Mom's behavior, the way she'd become distant and cold in the months before his death. He knew something was wrong, Laura said quietly, holding one of the letters. He just didn't know how wrong. In one of the boxes, I found a quilt my grandmother had been making before she passed. It was unfinished. The stitching stopped mid-pattern. Laura helped me find a quilter who could complete it in my grandmother's style. It sits on my bed now, a tangible connection to the family I almost lost. I enrolled in college the following fall, using the trust money for its intended purpose. I studied forensic accounting, inspired by the professionals who'd helped me uncover the truth about my own life. Laura came to my graduation 4 years later, crying harder than anyone else in the audience. Sophia reached out occasionally. She'd gotten a settlement from her father's assets and used it to put herself and Ethan through school. We met for coffee once a year, comparing notes on our healing, our therapy, our attempts to build normal lives from the wreckage of our childhoods. Mom wrote to me from prison once. The letter was 6 pages long, full of explanations and justifications, and what she probably thought were apologies. She blamed Kevin. She blamed Mark. She blamed her own childhood. She never once blamed herself. I didn't write back. Some people ask me if I regretted starting a lawsuit, exposing everything, sending my own mother to prison. The answer is no. She made her choices. She chose Mark over me. She chose her comfort over my inheritance. She chose to hide the truth about my father's death rather than face what she'd done. Every step of the way, she had opportunities to do the right thing. And every step of the way, she chose herself. I chose myself too. And that's not something I'll ever apologize for. Last month, I visited my father's grave for the first time in years. Laura came with me. We brought flowers and stood in the sunshine, talking to him like he could hear us. I told him about my job at a forensic accounting firm, helping other families uncover financial crimes. I told him about the apartment I bought, the friends I'd made, the life I was building. I told him that I finally understood why he loved me so fiercely, because I'd learned to love myself the same way. Laura squeezed my hand when I started crying. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. When we left the cemetery, a car was parked near the entrance. Inside, I could see a woman staring at us. Thin, pale, graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. Aunt Carol. She visited Mom in prison every month for the past 3 years. She still believed Mom was innocent, that I'd somehow orchestrated the entire thing out of spite. She sent me letters, too, sometimes. I didn't read those, either. She watched us drive away, and I didn't look back. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of lemonade and looked out at the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Ethan got promoted. Dinner next week to celebrate. I texted back, I'll be there. The stars were coming out, faint against the light pollution, but visible if you knew where to look. My grandmother used to point out the constellations when I was little, before Mom stopped letting me visit her. I could see Orion rising in the east, my father's favorite constellation. He'd shown it to me when I was 4 years old, lifting me onto his shoulders so I could trace the belt with my finger. Some things can be taken from you, your money, your home, your place in the family that should have loved you. But other things can't. The memory of your father's voice. The weight of his hands on your shoulders. The way he made you feel like you mattered, like you belonged, like you were worth protecting. Mom tried to erase me. Instead, she erased herself. And I'm still here, still standing, still looking at the stars. The truth about healing is that it rarely comes in the form we expect. Sometimes justice arrives not as closure, but as a door opening to rooms we never knew existed. Love, real love, cannot be erased by silence or stolen by neglect, because it lives not in what others give us, but in what we learn to give ourselves. You are allowed to walk away from people who diminish you. You are allowed to build a family from those who choose you. This journey taught me more about betrayal, resilience, and self-worth than I ever thought possible. I'm curious, have any of you ever had to choose yourself in a difficult family situation? Or perhaps found an unexpected family when you least expected it? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. I truly want to hear them.